I've learned and what I would advocate very strongly is take in the vertical leadership of matrix and allow that subject matter expertise to be encouraged to have a mindset of experimentation and abundance. And that's where I'm seeing some of my less experienced teammates just take off. And now my awesome leadership job now is to get out of the way. It's amazing, right?
Hello and welcome. This is Gilda Vanderhayden. Today we are starting our brand new interview series, Wellbeing Works. I have a special guest with me today, our very first guest actually, Mike Moss, who is the president of the Society for College and University Planning, also known affectionately as SCUP. They really unite the best of college and professional planners. And Mike actually has a pretty extensive background in the nonprofit management space, ranging all the way, really honestly, decades of experience, has worked everywhere from membership through human resources, IT, all the way up, and is now in a leadership position. Mike, is there anything you wanted to add? I know SCUP's focus is really about planning for the engagement, learning value, and effectiveness that's going to really unite higher education leaders. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to your background.
No, thank you. And it's great to be here. I really appreciate the invitation, the opportunity to talk with you. And I would add that the premise by which we do our work is a discipline called integrated planning. And what really brings me back to work every morning and what I'm willing to get fired for, as opposed to what I'm willing to get up for, is the outcomes of integrated planning are all about relationships. And it's all about really being mindful of those you work with and how you serve your mission. And so 30 years into my career, I'm really at a really interesting place with an organization that through planning is really developing long-term relationships that serve the student and then, of course, serve the greater good. So it's a really cool place to be.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And this being the first episode of the Wellbeing Works show, it is just designed to create healthier, happy, resilient teams from the inside out. I just wanted to mention that, given the context of the topic we're going to be talking about today, which is really around the concept of purposeful presence, which Mike has successfully introduced to his own organization. And also, just to give a little fun background, Mike actually likes starting his day with, reading blogs, listening to different podcasts, catching up on the news, and surprisingly, listening to Metallica. So that was a really cool one. I want to just throw that in there. And so, according to the Lehman Index, purposeful presence, the way they define it is just simply if employees are offered a reasonable level of choice for when they use their time at the office, their trips will increasingly have a particular purpose in mind. And I know when I first heard the term purposeful presence, what really came to mind for me was more about being in the present moment and mindfulness in terms of allowing each moment to unfold in its own time without any judgment. So I know that's a completely different concept, but I would imagine that the presence part of it overlays between the two. And I just was curious what your definition of purposeful presence means, especially with your own organization.
Now, that's great context because, yes, and the way that we're working the concept of purposeful presence is really it's the intentions of why we are here. But why we are here does not necessarily mean that we're all in the same room at the same time, but we are all here for the same reason. So the intentions of why we're together. And that intentionalness is really, we could call it meaningful presence if we wanted to really start splitting the terms down, but I think both work. So our purposeful presence sometimes is a hybrid, sometimes it's all virtual, sometimes we're all in person, and sometimes we're somewhere all the way in between, but we have an intentional reason to be together. And then we focus on that intention for the time that we have.
Fantastic. And is there a certain time frame that you came across the idea of purposeful presence and when you decided that this was something you wanted to make part of SCUP?
Yeah, so as we came into 22 and the pandemic started to not normalize, but started to be understood how to be managed, right? So we've been very mindful of wellness and well-being and both physical and mental sides of that through the entire pandemic. And it's been a really good journey for SCUP, and particularly for my teammates. And as we came into 22, we're like, all right, we used to be a 3-2 house, right? 3 days in, 2 days out. pretty cool, right? It was a pretty easy balanced thing, but we weren't sure that still applied. We've become really good at virtual. We had some employees distribute and start to split time elsewhere and work in different markets, and we didn't want to get in the way of that. So in our research, we did come across purposeful presence. And initially, we defined that as still a purposeful set of hours in the office. And so that was our initial experiment last summer. So the summer of 22 is when we really started to try and figure out what this looks like. And that was a mandate. And so we mandated a time of, in a 5-day work week, you must be here X amount of time. You figure out what days, for what reasons, with what team, for what reasons. But otherwise, I'm kind of asking for this. And we did that for a couple months, and it was moderately successful at best and became performative for sure.
Okay.
Because it was the right idea, poorly executed. And so that was a great lesson for us. And when I say poorly executed, I own that because I poorly executed it. As the gift of the role I have as president is I set the policy, and that was a bad one. So I reset by doing some virtual brown bags with my teammates, who there's 17 of us here now. And man, we had some honest conversation, and it was wonderful. So then we took a couple months to really rethink it through. So in January of 23, we began what we now are operating as under purposeful presence, which is there's 2 rules. The office is open.
Mm-hmm.
And number 2 is we have 2 purposeful presence meetings a month, the 2nd and 4th Wednesday.
Oh, nice.
So there's our new policy.
Yeah, and this all came from you doing those brown bag sessions with your staff to find out what parts they liked or was working and what parts were not.
Correct. And not surprisingly, in those conversations, that what we all know as employers was coming out. Oh, I like the flexibility, and you feels like you're taking that away. I like my own opportunity for choice. But what if I choose Mondays, but the people I really need to work with don't show up till Wednesdays? We're really not purposely meeting. And so it was really a good conversation around the intention. And as you can imagine, as a planning community and as a planning staff, words really matter. Mm-hmm. Definitions of those words, how they're applied, are very specific and intentional. And so purposeful presence, and you mentioned this earlier, presence was the word. The meaningfulness or purposefulness or whatever other adjective we want to put in front, that was less important as presence. So as I really listened to my teammates and then did some more research, I realized what I had done was I got into echo chambers of old school traditional management. And I wasn't listening to the voices that said, sure, we'll do that if you make me. Because that was basically one of the messages. I'll do what you ask me to do. It's fine. But whenever somebody says it's fine, we all know there's opportunity, right?
Right.
So as we came into those discussions, what I really learned about what my staff meant by presence was we're willing to come in for something that applies to all 17 of us so we can work together, socialize together, be together. And then the rest of the time, give me choice.
Right.
It was really that simple, right? It was not complex. And so the office is open. Any of us can come in any day, any hour, any time. There's a key card thing, right? Just show up and do what you want to do when you want to do it.
Yeah.
2 times a month from about 5 hours, 11 to 3-ish or 11 to 4-ish.
Okay.
We have an intentional reason to be here in presence. And so if you're in the hybrid market, which is 15 of us are in the hybrid market, we would like you to be in the office. Mm-hmm. And we have 3 people who are coastal and aren't going to be here every time. Sometimes they fly in, sometimes they don't. But we don't have an unlimited budget yet.
Right.
Right. So once we do, we'll figure that out. But they're here sometimes, but they're always here in presence because they're on the videos, the video screens in the room. Mm-hmm. So the first Wednesday that we meet, so the 2nd Wednesday of the month, is one around operational alignment.
Okay.
And then that 2nd session, the 4th Wednesday, is around strategic alignment.
Interesting. I
so
like
those
this.
are the purposes. So that's the purpose, purposeful part. And the presence is that we're going to work collaboratively. Think about workshop modes, think about any version of collaborative work. It will not be a sit and listen to Mike talk.
Okay. Yes.
Not doing presentations. Presentations can be recorded and watched whenever anybody has time. So we're very intentional about that presence being an optimal, awesome opportunity to socialize, work, and problem solve, ideate, and then go home, do your work. Yeah. And then meet when you meet, right? Don't worry about it, right?
Yeah.
So that's been the cadence then of our purposeful presence.
Oh, I love that. And I also love the fact that just at the beginning of you sharing that, you completely own the first version. And, you know, I don't know how many leaders necessarily do that, but I think that just shows your level of flexibility and learning. And, you know, none of us are going to get it right the first time anyway, but just owning that and then going back, getting the feedback that you needed. And it just sounds like this is a great model. And that's why I really want to have you on the show, that this is what's possible for other organizations, other leaders, no matter where you are in your journey. And so just keep that in mind, because, you know, again, none of us get it right the first time. Awesome. And you already answered that other question with what that actually looks like. So I love the intention behind it, and especially the part of with the collaboration and it being more interactive and more of a conversation, because you're right, it's not anyone's fault. I think we all grew up with this cultural programming of old school traditional, this is what it's supposed to look like. And, you know, no one's really questioned it until COVID hit, right?
Right.
Is there anything else you wanted to add in terms of other successes or past failures in regards to this piece of it? If not, if you already covered that, that's perfectly fine.
No, thank you. Thank you for the compliments on that, because it did take a minute, and it's going to take another minute till we get it really, really running, right? One of the things I would say is that I would assume in most organizations like mine, we have a set of managers who are very good at on-site oversight, right? We came up in that tradition, we managed in that tradition, we're successful in that tradition.
Right.
And then the world said, but maybe not anymore. And I think one of the things that I don't belittle, and I fully don't understand, to be honest, I also don't fully understand, was the whole quiet quitting and minimalist Mondays and these kind of things that come up through either social media trends or other means, which is fine. I don't really understand them, because what I don't understand is why it has to be one thing or the other, right? And I think maybe it's just inherently, as a planning community, we just think a little bit differently. But it doesn't need to be on-site oversight or basically everybody everywhere. It needs to almost always be a blend of both. And so it's that abundance mindset that's so common and so, you know, infrequently used, which is yes and. Yes, we need some on-site oversight. Yes, and we need the flexibility to be where we do our best work. Yes, and sometimes we need to do both at the same time.
Yeah.
And so
And
how do
also,
we
yeah,
that? Yeah.
exactly. And you also just mentioned it's a constant iteration. So, and I think that's going to be true for every organization for sure. Yeah, no,
Every one of our when we call them P2s, because why not abbreviate everything, right? We're an association, so there's going to be an acronym. So now the purposeful presence meetings are known as P2s.
Oh.
And in each iteration of the P2, while the intent is operation strategy,
yeah,
the actual facilitation for all the meetings we've done so far, completely different.
Oh.
Because they're not a rinse, wash, and repeat. It is for a set of outcomes that are determined for that workshop.
Yeah.
The P2s have not all been facilitated by myself. I've done one. I'm going to do one next week.
Sure.
Another colleague has done a series of 3. And so we're being very open to, you know, titles don't determine your subject matter expertise.
Yeah.
The subject matter expertise needs to be opened and facilitated, and we're letting everybody take a chance and an opportunity to run a P2. It's been pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, I like that. And again, keeping those doors open for new ideas as well. And then is there anything in terms of your leadership role? And obviously modeling is one big part of that, in terms of your success in integrating this into SCUP. Meaning for other leaders, what kinds of behaviors or other values have you modeled or that really you think contributed to the success of what you're doing now?
Great question. I think one of the things I've learned in the last 3 years is that it's not uncommon for us in any leadership role to say, you know, oh, it's okay to fail, right? That's a common thing. And we mean that, right? And especially those of us who came out of the Lean Signal world, it's okay to fail. That's part of the iteration. But what I think we're learning is it's not so much that it's okay to fail. Please experiment. It's the same thing, really. But having a culture of experimentation with the permission to iterate off your experiments welcomes failure. And again, it's that yes and, not the yeah, but, well, I tried that, yeah, but it didn't work. Well, I tried that, yes, and I'm now doing this because these 4 things worked and these 4 things we won't talk about. But it's that, I think that's what I've learned the most, is that the terminology matters, but more so than the terminology, it's the openness to 3 things, which is listen, hear, and see. And I think as we think about wellness in particular, wellness comes from not just always being successful, but it does come from being listened to, from actually being heard, and certainly being seen. And I think opening up the dynamic of leadership to be more matrix than hierarchical. There's always a vertical in HR. There's reasons for that. I'm fine with that. But what I've learned, and what I would advocate very strongly, is take in the vertical leadership of matrix and allow that subject matter expertise to be encouraged to have a mindset of experimentation and abundance. And that's where I'm seeing some of my less experienced teammates just take off. And now my awesome leadership job now is to get out of the way. It's amazing, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm curious too, Mike, because I know everyone has their own both personal and professional growth to development. And given that you had the background of the traditional management style, I'm just curious if there's anything that shifted along the way to have you really live this listen, hear, and see mode, because it's very admirable. But I know of a lot of leaders that I even work with or am acquainted with that just not how they're operating for whatever reason. I know having someone who's had that experience will help them figure out, well, what does their path look like? In other words, was there any shift or things that helped you get to that place to see that, or have maybe this is always something you've lived?
I think maybe, when I joined the planet, I came out as a systems thinker, right? So I can't see things in linear fashion. If you really, really paid me well, I still can't see it that way. My brain does not work that way.
Okay.
And so what I appreciate about the field that I've chosen to serve in the nonprofit space is that we're always looking to serve greater good, which is a systems of solutions. It's never been linear. And so I honestly think I would fail if all I was supposed to do was produce one thing the same way all day. I would be a disaster because cognitively I can't do it. And so I think there's a blessing in that cognitively I just always wanted to see, well, what else? What if I went over here? And so I think just inherently I was given that blessing. Okay. How I've applied that in work is, I think one of the most important things I learned from years and years ago from one of my mentors, who, by the way, and this is what young people need to remember, myself included when I was young, is that boss that's driving you crazy. 10 years from now, you're going to look back and go, oh my goodness gracious, those were some of the best lessons I ever learned.
Interesting.
Doesn't mean it changes your personal opinion, but the experience might be as invaluable as anything else you will do in your learning journey. So one of my early mentors gave me a phrase that, of course, decades later, I'm in this service role in planning. He said, your lack of planning will not drive my sense of urgency.
I love that. Yes.
And I thought I was pretty cool because I could last minute everything and be successful. And that was an eye opener for me. So listening and being aware of those moments when it's just a sentence, it's just a moment, it might actually be a discipline moment. I've always been very open to those, but I also challenge myself to take as much in as I can from industries I'm not in. So you mentioned at the beginning, I'm a pretty active reader. And yes, I am a massive heavy metal person, which also influences my thinking. So I think the reading piece is, I learned that very early in my career, is that learning is a social sport. It's a social interaction, and do everything you can. I used to have an old school Palm Pilot back in the day. And on the outside, a friend of mine had taped on there, outread them all. And that was his advice to me. And so I just have always wanted to take that in, but I don't just read for my own expertise. I want to read for awareness. And there's so many beautiful experiments going on around us, especially now, that inform your organization's opportunities. It's not just in your space. And so that's what I think I've learned the most over the 31 years I've been doing this.
Ah, perfect. Thank you for sharing. That's a golden nugget for sure. Especially the part about, you maybe it feeling not so fun when you're in it, but just looking that 10,000 foot view from above or even forward, that somehow there is something in there that can still serve you and be some kind of learning. So well said. Yeah, and the other main question I'm sure a lot of leaders are wondering is, how do organizations create a sense of accountability and trust, especially in terms of getting the work done, making sure that happens, and this freedom to have that purposeful presence and, you know, being able to do what you need to do both personally, professionally on your own time. So that's a big question. And I'm really curious about that.
So for some who hear these conversations with how we're doing things here at SCUP, based on their own personal experiences, they may be like, well, that's the most loosey-goosey thing I've ever heard of. And you know, you just let everybody run wild. It's amazing you're still in business. I can totally see that, right? And that's a fair optic. But it's really not, because the accountability is really built into your culture. It's not one of hierarchical HR, which still matters. I am not dismissing the importance of structure and HR and those important functions of a business. But on the day-to-day, my teammates hold each other accountable through the opportunity to be in the place where they do their best work.
Okay.
And it's not perfect, but it wasn't perfect in my old environments either of on-site oversight. Because at the end of the day, human behaviors are pretty amazing and pretty predictable and sometimes pretty discouraging, but it's just human behavior. Giving the opportunity for people to be their best self, to do their best work, and then come back for the social interaction, social learning piece of it, we're finding that there's a lot of unstated accountability that is producing much more positive deliverable, positive experimentation, and really it becomes a more joyful workplace because people aren't beholden to Mike's making me dot.
Right.
Well, actually, I still asked for that product to be delivered on that day at that time, but I didn't tell you how to get there and where you had to do it.
Right. Okay.
That's the big difference, I think.
Okay.
That it's meeting people, and this phrase is common too. It's like, you know, meet them where they are. And even in our pre-pandemic iteration, we didn't totally do that. We did that 2 days a week, but 3 days a week, we told you where to be and where to work, and in a lot of cases, how to work. And just taking away some of those and letting the freedom do your best work where you do your best work, and then come back together for the social exchange has, I think, really been a game changer for us. Yeah. I don't think we have it perfect yet. I don't want to sell that.
Sure.
but I am very proud of my teammates and where we are in this journey, and it's opening up a strategic opportunity conversation that we would not have been able to have without what they're doing. It's changing the future optics of service for SCUP in a very positive way that our members are seeing, our board and volunteers are seeing. It's changing the opportunities for SCUP's future because they are working their best way in their best moment where they do their best work.
Great. Yeah. And then that's something that definitely resonates, meaning you've got hey, here's what you need to get done. Here's the timeline. You pick how you want to get there, which is great. Yeah. Some organizations might not have the team that you have, and maybe you've been over the years been able to hand pick some of the good ones, but I don't know if you've ever had to deal with any challenges where you've explained this is what needs to happen and it's not happening. Have you had any challenges like that, and how have you navigated those waters?
No, absolutely, of course. And some of it really comes down to you got to understand your capacities, your capabilities, and you got to hold your accountabilities. Right? It's just it's 101 level, and it's super hard.
Okay.
Right. And what I mean by that is it also means you have to have transparent, and you mentioned this earlier, you got to have trust. And we have a lot of, in those purposeful presence conversations, we talk about capacities. And we know our product calendar because everyone knows our product calendar.
Okay.
But what I may not know is that my colleague over, 2 doors over is so far past capacity this month. But if she doesn't tell me, I may throw over another project. For another, right?
Okay.
So open communication. So we use a framework, a very common framework called RACI, where we do our projects in that framework, where some people are responsible for certain things. There's one person who's accountable for the delivery of that product. And a lot of times that's not a senior manager. It's just someone in that team is accountable for its delivery and accountable for making sure people are doing their work when they need to do their work in the best way they can do their work. And then there's people who are consulted, and then there's the people who are informed. And so it keeps teams kind of tight and focused, but they are self-managing in a framework that we all use.
Okay.
So if it happens to be a project where, as president, I'm the one that's accountable for it, the behaviors of that framework will not be any different than my colleague who's a manager of membership when she was accountable for the deliverable within that framework. So that's given us the consistency of a framework by which one is responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed. I
Wow.
think that has been a huge contributor to what we're doing.
Okay. Okay. Wow. And it
So,
doesn't sound like something that you created overnight. I mean, it
oh
really
Lord,
sounds like these are building blocks that have evolved over time and obviously had to be tweaked and everything. But it sounds like there are frameworks for how you operate as a team and individually, and then everyone has sort of adapted that culture, which is incredible.
let me thank you, Jill. That's really important because the RACI experiments have been going on for probably 5 years, right? That was
Okay.
not a post-pandemic thing.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So to be clear, you bring up a really good point. We've been doing these things for at least 5 years, because 5 years ago we reset our culture and we agreed to what that meant. And then 2 years into our work of having a new internal culture, the pandemic showed up.
Mm-hmm.
And it accelerated. We didn't abandon our work. It accelerated our work of how we're going to want to work together now, later, in the future. And so we tested these frameworks, and we have built up the successes. And it's not uncommon, even 5 years into this, you're 2 weeks into a project, and someone goes, "I forgot to put the racing in. Hold on, give me a minute." Right. So it still takes practice and reinforcement.
Sure. Yes.
But you bring up a very good point. This has been a journey. It is not something we figured out in the summer of 22
Right.
and launched in January of 23. So thank you for making that clarity. I should have done that up front.
Oh no. I'm just glad. I'm just thinking it was so impressive that I thought, knowing the kind of work that I'm doing with clients, it is a process. And I'm thinking, well, is that true, or did it happen,
Yeah.
overnight? Which is fine. In some cases, maybe that's possible. But that's encouraging and inspiring that, no matter where you are, there's somewhere to start. And
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing all these insights so that other people can take some of the ideas back to their own organizations and really start to try them out for themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. And some of these things, like you said, like on social media, what's trending within, what's going on at remote versus hybrid workplaces and all that stuff. So I would imagine even things like this are still going to be in that category. And for me and for you, it's how we're living. I want to just mention that. But in terms of a long-term impact, rather than it just be something short-lived in social media, is there anything that organizations can do to ensure that that's the focus and then you continue on that trajectory?
I think so, because I said, and it's a think so because we're still figuring it out too, because we think that we started this journey correctly based on our own client experiences and our own 50+ year history as an organization. Is that it? And Drucker said this in the 70s, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so we really took that first step in 2017 to 2018. And we're like, stop. Let's just stop. Let's get our culture understood. And we designed it from the inside out, right?
Yeah.
So we had someone help us with that journey. But the team that I'm still largely working with is still largely the same group of people. Okay. Designed how we wanted to work together, why we wanted to work together, and what ways we wanted to work together. They designed that. With management and with new employees as we build the team, they've refined that so that now, let's say you and I were interviewing for work at SCUP, it's not the same interview as it was in 2017 because we want to make sure, and it's not about, we're very careful with that. It is about fit, but it's really not.
Yes.
Right? It's about the attributes that you're bringing in towards where we're going against the attributes that we already have and how we might imagine those attributes really working well together. The attributes are more than a degree, and I love higher ed. I represent higher ed. I love education. But when I'm really looking for a teammate, I'm really looking for someone who's going to be able to come in and bring their best self with the expertise that they have, with the curiosity for the expertise they don't.
Yes.
That's why we're interviewing.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure whatever you say in your resume, I'm pretty sure you're going to be able to do that, or you won't be here long, so we're not worried about that. What I really want to know is, what are you curious about? And why would SCUP help fuel that personal curiosity that you have?
Yeah.
That's why I'm a very spoiled person. I've had very little turnover in 5 years.
Wow.
Particularly in the pandemic, I've only lost one person since the pandemic started. And I lost her to a client, which I'm very proud of. When I lose to a client, that's awesome.
That's good. Yeah. Oh, that's good. Yeah. And it's interesting though. I thought you mentioned that it was 5 years ago that you started the culture work. So that's kind of interesting in terms of and that was one of my questions for you as far as retention and turnover. So I mean, I don't think it's coincidental that that
I hope not.
5-year mark lined up. And the other thing I just wanted to point out is, I have some of the nonprofit clients I work with are more community based. Their clients really rely on them for services. And so there can be times when, if they're understaffed and they have a few folks out, there's a temptation to just get that position filled because they've got the need. But I think if you are really intentional around creating what that culture looks like and how you work, and not only clear about it, but it's part of how you operate, that then when you have new folks potentially interviewing or coming on board, it's not about just filling in the warm body for that space. I think that's a big reason why you have the retention that you do have, because you've also kind of like this whole concept of slow to hire. Yeah, slow to hire, and maybe not so quick to fire. But if it's not working out within the 90 days, yeah, something along those lines. And I think that that's super important for folks that are in the reactive, I just need to get somebody in there. If you think about it, that choice could lead to even more turnover down the line and even more lost time, more, clients that don't have the service than just filling that in right away. So just wanted to point that out.
Well, that's really good. And retention, turnover is expensive,
Mhm.
right? And even as it comes to our own membership, right? It's better to keep a member than to have to go get a member. Acquisition's expensive, right? So all those things are true. But also, I think what we've learned along the years, and we have had, prior to 2017, 18, there were some people who it wasn't for them. But you don't have to make it a stressful moment. We can make it a learning moment. And I think that's what helped inform the culture project, is we needed to learn, why are we here, and under what set of services do we all agree to? And those services actually were for ourselves. We obviously have clear sets of services for our members. That we're a nonprofit, that's very clear what we're going to do. But for how we serve ourselves was not a part of the standard conversation. And that's actually where we start. How we serve ourselves is going to be better than how we have to do that well, so we can better serve those on the external side of the wall, right?
Yeah.
So that's something that I think takes a lot of work. And I mean, we mentioned a couple of the pandemic failures between summer of 22 and the Purposeful
Right.
Presence.
Right.
And you can only imagine how many there were before that, in terms of some false starts in culture projects or false starts in conflict resolution. Because conflict is an outcome of not addressing disagreement, right? So in our culture work, we spent a lot of time on, it's okay to be in disagreement. These frameworks encourage and allow creative tensions. And that's an area of disagreement which can really lend to some positive contributions. But in other environments I've worked in, it was either everybody was fine or we were all fighting.
Right.
And that's not obviously healthy.
Right.
And it led to quick turnovers, because you went from, the proverbial, I went from 0 to 100 and I won. Is that we try and operate somewhere between, 30 and 70, right? So that if there's going to be moments where you and I disagree, that how we manage that is talked about. And when the frameworks we use, it's encouraged for creative tensions. Those are good things.
Yeah,
So I
definitely.
think I like how you said all that. And there is a lot of, I've interviewed, this is my 5th association, right? So I've been through a lot of interviews. I always present my best self in the interview because I really want to.
Right.
And then on my 91st day of employment, I might all of a sudden become my true self. And sometimes it just doesn't work. But if we can really bring the true self out on day one, there's a much better chance that it becomes a rewarding opportunity for the employer and for the employee.
Right.
And that takes a lot of work. And I don't want to undersell any of that. And just because we've been doing it now for half a decade, we're not masters.
Sure.
But every iteration of new hire, we get better. And right now, we're in an interesting moment. We have 3 retarees.
Oh, wow. Oh, my
at
goodness.
the same time, right?
Yeah.
47 years of SCUP experience will be retiring
Wow.
in the next 45 days.
Okay.
And so it's an opportunity. Everybody knows those are opportunities to do this, do that. But most importantly, it's an opportunity to really reinforce all the stuff that those folks help build in terms of culture.
Right.
They are such amazing people. I can't replicate any of their skill sets. I can replicate the culture in the next person who has the opportunity to then discover themselves. That's what we're doing and trying to fill their roles. It's not Mike for Mike. Mike retired, but man, wouldn't it be interesting if, and then explore that. And I think that's something that the next 5 years we'll get better at.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And if you don't mind me asking, because the conflict thing, yeah, I've seen both where there's the
Yeah.
complete head to head, and
Yeah.
honestly, it's resulted in either one person, one employee leaves, or that it's just tolerated, and then I don't even know. I mean, there's been a
Right.
bunch of those. So are there any other insights or tips that, this is again iterations and years of experience, but that helped you? Because at least for the clients that I'm really working with, I'm finding we've got to focus on the trust building part first, but then the next piece is then that effective communication. And that does involve how you handle conflict and how you're able to express yourself, or even just as simple as, like you had mentioned earlier, if there's a bump in the road, just making sure that anyone impacted by whatever that project is you're working on is aware, and maybe some other team member helps pick up the slack, or there's a redirection of who handles whatever that may look like. But I'm just curious again, for those that are watching, how did you find that nice middle ground where it's more of a healthy conflict? Yeah, we're human, conflict's going to happen, but and maybe it's partially because you're running this organization, so you get to decide what that looks like, because you mentioned it was more past organizations. How did you get to where you are now with that healthy level of conflict?
As we've talked about, it takes a minute.
Yes.
And one of the things that no one's going to really support. Well, let's experiment with people's emotions. That's a great experiment. I'm not advocating that.
Right.
There's really only maybe a couple ways to run a meeting. And that meeting, whether it's just you and I, like in a difficult moment, or our team in a difficult moment, is that oftentimes we default to the most authoritative position in the room giving a presentation on how things are going to be moving forward.
Yes.
So there's this presentation of,
Yes.
this is how it's going to be. Sometimes that works really well. Most of the time it has a short shelf life.
Yes.
Right. And so then there's the other opportunity where you do some expertise sharing and allow everybody in the room a point counterpoint.
Yes.
So that you can build and find the ideas regardless of role, title, and experience. So everybody's got a perspective. So do point counterpoint and see how it goes. And then, of course, there's the other iteration, which is just a negotiation. We wanted blue pins and all the pins came out green. Okay. What do we need to do? And you negotiate a different process. So you really focus on the process, not the people. And I think one of the most important things I've learned along the way is that most of our internal person-to-person conflict is driven on a disagreement of a process. So let's just negotiate the process and see if it changes the relationship of you and I, or the people, or the team.
Yes.
And then the last one is like, all right, I have no idea how to figure any of this out. We've tried point counterpoint, we've tried negotiating. Let's build on ideas and start over. And but again, it's not role and title and experience based. It is based on everyone in the room. Wow. And most of us, and I'm one of these folks, because I'm normal, is I get so excited because I've like 3 decades of all this stuff. And sometimes my just normal self wants to just, right? That's the best solution. I need to check myself, give my expertise, but then give the room the expertise. The room is smarter than always. We all know this, right? The room is always smarter than the individual. So in those different ways to run a meeting, give your room the space to be a part of the solution. And they can self-select out if they're not comfortable, but give them the opportunity to select out. Don't wait for the invite in. And I think that's just a mindset difference.
So well said. And thank you. That's, again, a gem, absolute gem, because it almost sounded like, you had these 3 different approaches, and then out of that, I think your systems background of not seeing linearly came in handy, because it's like, well, wait, there's a whole different option. Let's just scrap it and start from the ground up without, preference to who has what expertise or authority. And then, but the key being allowing that space, like you said, you got to do that self-check-in, because again, they're natural habits we all have, right? Which is fine. But the fact in that level of awareness, you recognize, wait, I'm going to stop. I'm going to pause, self-check-in, and give that space to see
Yeah.
what comes out of it. That's awesome. And again, so great. This is what's so encouraging, because it's been an evolution and an iteration, and seeing and you sharing this is just something that I think a lot of folks are going to be able to, even if it's just one thing. We don't want to overwhelm anyone, just one thing that you can experiment with, and
Yeah.
have a little laundry list about that you want to try. This is super helpful. I really appreciate you sharing that, Mike. Anything in regards to purposeful presence and the level of employee engagement or increased motivation or commitment? Did you see any changes on that front at all?
Yeah, definitely. And it was unexpected, right? So
Yeah.
as one can imagine, coming off the boss's mandate of you must, that the first couple of weeks of the office is just open while we figure this out. So in November, I said, look, the office is open, but give me a couple months to figure this out based on what you told me. All that feedback.
Yes.
Right? Is that it was pretty sparse attendance for a while. And that was okay.
Okay.
Because what we also went back and asked and learned is like, you know what? Let's just be honest about how our cadence of work works. So there's 12 months, and only 10 of those will have any level of purposeful presence.
Okay.
August and December, office is open, but there's no purposeful presence requirements in those 2 months. It's a high vacation month, it's high family months,
Yes.
a lot of religious opportunities. Let's not worry about forcing ourselves into presence in those 2 months. The other 10, let's figure it out.
Right.
So and so once we did that, it was interesting. We come into the new year, and the office is open, the Wednesday cadence is set, and all of a sudden people who I hadn't seen in months were showing up randomly on a Tuesday, back again on Friday, and then half a day Monday. And so there was days where of the 15 of us that were local in the hybrid, I could have 0, 4, 6, 8, 0, 2 in a cadence of a week in terms of attendance, and it was always different. It wasn't like, 3 of us decided we're always going to come in Monday, Wednesday, and half day Friday. It was nothing like that. It was very random, and it still is. But people are finding that there are things they enjoy doing at the office, and there are times they enjoy social interaction as an influencer to their work. And it's random. And so there's some people who I didn't see for almost all of 2020 and all of 21.
Oh, wow.
In 23, I'm seeing them pretty regularly because I do like being here. I come in quite often, but not always for all day.
Right.
I come in and do my things and there's like really good internet here. I probably should do these meetings here, right? So there's those kind of decisions that we make, but that's what I think's been really interesting is it's not even generational. It's not role dependent. It's like all the senior people on this. It's completely random, but they're really embracing the office is open and they make their choices. And that's been really cool to watch. And surprising. I did not expect that.
Yeah. And it's again, that idea of when you let things sit and give it time.
Yeah.
And like we said at the beginning, that being in the present moment, just seeing what unfolds when you allow that space. So really, really well said. Is there any other advice that you would give to someone in a position where they see the idea that this is what is possible? Where do I start? Any other advice that you want to share? But in terms of whether it's establishing purposeful presence or even on the subject of work-life balance, whatever comes to mind, just in the well-being of work categories, or anything else that you would mention if you were to give a younger leader some advice on the topic?
Wow, that's a great question. Just give yourself permission. Whatever that means for you, but give yourself permission. And for some of us, that may be the first time we give ourselves permission to fail. For others, it may be my first time I'm giving myself permission to do something experimental or different or non-traditional.
Yeah.
And so give yourself permission and see how that goes. And every one of us knows the culture of our office to some degree. Like, I am a huge heavy metal person. I do start my day with Metallica. That's all straight up. But I also know I really can't show up in concert garb for work. But that's really who I am. So when I have, but I sometimes give myself permission now to show up in a Metallica shirt with ripped jeans and boots because that's how I do my best work at that moment, right? So, and it's a small thing. I realize that's a small thing, but that's a permission gate, right? That we want to give each other, give ourselves, give it to your teammates, do it in small doses, and see what happens. But it starts with permission of self, and I think that was the biggest thing I've learned in my journey. Is that I often was so worried about the permission of my supervisor and my supervisor that I never gave myself permission. And I think that's my biggest lesson. To my younger self, have permission.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. And just imagine what's possible when you remove those gates or those blocks or limitations to say that I need permission from this person, that person, what have you. And it's, yeah, very well said and amazing. Thank you so
Well, thank
much,
you. This was
Mike.
so much
I
fun.
really loved it. And what a awesome way to start out this Wellbeing at Works show.
Another thing I wanted to mention was the idea of no update meetings. And so in order to allow people to do the best work in the best place in the best way, we often intersect their most creative times with a 30-minute update meeting to tell me what have you been up to? And we don't maybe mean it to be oversight on site, but we're interrupting their day for simply an update. Keep me informed. Use Slack or any comparable tool, but put it in a channel, put the people in the channel that need to know, give them the update, and they will consume that update, and now they're updated. And we didn't take a break in the day. And maybe you did your update at midnight. I read it at 6 in the morning. I'm informed.
Right.
Because the purpose of update meetings have largely been one of accountability against progress. Fine. Give that to me in writing in Slack or any other comparable tool. Love it. And then when we do meet, we're actually meeting to problem solve, ideate, create, and really embrace our best energy towards service and not just towards the rote activities of the business, which we have to do. Let's do that through Slack channels and keep each other informed.
Yeah, and it's almost like if you could say in an email what you could in a meeting, that kind of efficiency. And I don't know if that's something that you all already do.
We're getting better at it. And I will say what I really appreciate about my teammates is that my inbox and email almost now is exclusively external. It is very rare that I get an internal email. We do our collaboration and communication and updating in Slack, and I just love it. I absolutely wish I had figured this out a decade ago, because my inbox now is one of external communication and service. And my Slack channel is one of collaboration and insight.
Wow.
Really cool. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So just if you missed that, if there were a way, here's the question that Mike just answered. If there were a way to eliminate all the internal emails and your email box only be to external parties, this is amazing. So thank you for sharing that. And Mike, please let us know, where can people find you and SCUP?
Yep. So please feel free to email me. You would be an external email. It will be welcome. Right? So please feel free to email me at Mike, M-I-K-E, .moss, M-O-S-S, at SCUP.org. Mike.moss@scup.org. And I would love to have a conversation, reference the video, reference this conversation that Jill and I had, and I would love to ideate and build with you.
So Mike, you were just telling me offline. In fact, this is such gold that came through. We have got to add this on here. Mike just mentioned that he's had his share of having to fire folks and didn't want to be looked at as so-called soft. So Mike, can you just speak a little bit more to that? I really wanted people to hear that.
Yeah, so thank you. So a lot of what we talked about today is obviously very positive. It's very human-centric. It's very welcoming. And we did acknowledge that there are conflicts and there are challenges, but we try and keep that in disagreement. And one of the things that I've had to learn along the way as a leader is there are differences in being insubordinate and being transparent. And there's fine lines there, but you got to be welcoming of understanding what that means. And I think one of the things I've had to check myself with and really learn is, are they being insubordinate, or are they being transparent with a really hard question and they don't have the skills or experience to ask it in a meaningful way? So one of the techniques my coaches taught me was, they say, I think I hear you asking this. Do you mind rephrasing? And being able just to check yourself there before you find out if they really are just over it and they're out. Or if they really are trying to be transparent, as you've asked them to be in this work environment, to approach a disagreement and help them find the skills and learn how those things work, so you can be as transparent and honest about your emotions and your feelings and what you believe to be true, and not have a fear of, well, if I say this to the boss, it's my last day.
Right.
Instead, if I say this to my boss, we're going to have a really interesting conversation and we're both going to learn. And that comes from the leader's side, I think, more so than the staff member side, which is, you got to know it might sound insubordinate, but is it really?
Yes.
And ask yourself that before we have our appropriate reaction. And to be fair, sometimes it is insubordinate, but it's rare. It's my experience. It's not insubordinate. It's a hard question that you've given them permission to ask.
Yes.
But they may not know how to ask it. So be mindful of that. It's a mindset that you have to really work on, and it's hard. But I think that is also why we're on the journey we are at SCUP, because all of us as leaders or managers have that mindset of, is it really insubordination, or is it really a hard question worded poorly?
Interesting. Yeah, because what can happen is someone gets emotionally involved in whatever the situation is, and it might come out the wrong way. But then when you give them that opportunity to say, you know, hey, I acknowledge what you're saying. Could you maybe I'm not understanding it correctly. Could you
Right.
rephrase it? And then that's giving them pause to then rephrase it. And I guess if it still comes up or there's a little bit of attitude, that's how you would know it would be
Yeah.
insubordination.
People are amazing, and we hire people because they're passionate and give a care. That's what's beautiful
Yeah.
about working in associations and nonprofits, is we give a care. And
Mhm.
that passion can be misdirected sometimes in a very
Yes.
unintentional way. And so giving the grace of not being condescending and like, I think you mean this,
Right.
but it's, being really honest and giving them the grace of saying, I hear you, but I
Mhm.
really want to understand you. And I think you're asking me
Mhm.
this, is that correct? And then
Right.
you will find out, and 99% of the time, no one really means to be insubordinate. They mean to ask a hard question because their
Right.
passions have been obstructed and they want to get past
Yes.
it. So how do we help them get past that? Is we teach them and coach them and help them ask and encourage them to ask hard questions of leadership. We
Mhm.
want that.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's important to remember because we're all human. So if someone says something and it's triggering, it's
Mhm.
needing to stop. But that pause, or like you call it, the self check-in, is something that I think is really valuable. And even if you have to table the
Yeah.
conversation, if you're
Great
already too
point.
triggered, to just say, hey, I heard what you said, and it's an important conversation for us to have, but I really want to have us give it the right time and space to address it appropriately. Hey, let's schedule some time later in the day and let's loop back on that.
Oh, I love that, because as much as I'd like to pretend I bring my best self every day, I don't. Right? I have bad days too.
Oh,
I
sure.
love what you just said, because that's also a very important part of it, is like, I can't do this today, but I want to do it, and let's schedule the time and I will bring my best self back.
Yep. And
I
you're
love
going to
that.
know, you know that if you do enough self check-ins, you know what that moment is. And it's giving yourself permission and the other person permission for having that space. So
Awesome.
very, very well done. Thank you. And I'm sorry we had to re-record. It was just so good. I'm like, I don't even want to stop recording in case Mike says something else. But
Very kind.
again, thank you all so much for watching. Ah, fantastic. Thank you again so much, Mike.
Thank you. This has been amazing, and thank you so much.
Thank you for joining our Wellbeing Works show. This is your host, Gilda Vanderhayden, creating healthy, happy, resilient teams from the inside out. And looking forward to our next episode at Wellbeing Works.